Okay, we will reconvene the special meeting of the City Commission, CRA, special meeting of the CRA, I'm sorry. Time is now 1:15, February 26, 2020. Question, Ms. Johnson, how do you see this discussion? Is it just freewheeling? Is there a certain format that you want to take? Is it up to us as commissioners to kind of, as the board members, to kind of work our way through it?
It is up to you all as the CRA board. There is
Okay.
no prescribed manner in which you need to have your discussion and deliberation. My only request would be that if there is consensus on your top choice, that you identify a number 2 in the event that negotiations fall through.
All right, board members, we know the task at hand, which is to select a candidate for the position of Executive Director of the CRA. And it's kind of up to us to figure it out. So does anybody want to offer any kind of comments, observations?
I'll start.
Okay.
I'll start because I think this is the easy part, and that is similar to Mayor and I think one of the commissioners' sentiments in terms of how this process has played out, which is new for me, and I think in some instances new for the city. But it has been, I believe, a seamless process, not without some opportunities as we look forward to future processes in terms of how do we continue to engage the community and other things along those areas. But we can always get better and learn from that. But specifically, just again, kudos to the human resource team and Ms. Johnson. This has really been a seamless process on my end as a commissioner, and I appreciate that. Having said that, and this is not just cliche, but I truly do believe that we have 5 candidates in front of us that all bring a different skill set and in their own rights could do this work. I don't feel like of the maybe 80 applicants that we've had, maybe more, we narrowed it down to 5, and I think these 5 are really, really strong candidates. And so again, that's the easy part, and that's why I went first, because I wanted to put that on the record. The next piece of this will not be as easy, because we have, I think, in front of us 5 unique individuals with different skill sets. I'm going to offer this up just because I went first, and then of course I want to hear from Mayor, if you're good with that, hear from everyone else regarding it. But maybe at a certain point as a starting point, well, no, we said we weren't going to do that, but if we focused on our top 2 candidates, that might be an easier way to get to a consensus, or not, as opposed to all 5. I'm just throwing that out as a process possibility.
Okay, Madam President.
Thank you. And I want to thank Ms. Johnson and the HR staff as well for helping to facilitate the process. As far as this next step, I am in favor of talking about and narrowing this down to our top 2. And I don't know if we should do this after we identify our top 2 or before, but I would like to have a discussion amongst all of us as to what it is that we're looking for out of this candidate, so that, we can just at least hear from each other and consider things. While I certainly hear things from our constituents, I'm sure that others do as well, and especially our commissioners who have residents specifically in these CRA districts.
Well, let me start on that point, since I think I kind of led the initiative, if you will, of bifurcating this position from the RMA contract. One of the motivating factors for me was to, I won't say ensure, but to certainly avoid any appearance of impropriety between the person who is the face of our CRA and RMA, who is the contractor. I just felt that there were too many opportunities for the possibility, I don't have any specific allegations, not going down that road, but for the possibility of decisions to be not necessarily in the city's favor as opposed to what was advantageous to RMA. So I just wanted to remove that. The other thing was important that, for me, that whoever holds this position is truly the face of the CRA to the community. And it's important that that individual, he or she, should be out there interfacing with the community, all elements of the community, all segments of the community, to further the CRA agenda. And so that's some of the things I'm looking for. And quite frankly, as I began engaging in this process and look at the resumes, I think having a fresh set of eyes to look at our body of work, our plan of work going forward is probably not a bad thing. And so I welcome this opportunity for some change, a fresh approach, just to kind of get a second opinion as to whether we're heading in the right direction. So that's just my personal observations. Commissioner Shove.
Thank you, Mayor, and certainly 5 qualified candidates. We have some diversity amongst backgrounds, amongst budget levels, and one of the things that's keenly important to me, and we have to watch with any kind of changes, to keep the things that we have that are good going, and so getting that level of consistency while still, I was very, very supportive of the much needed change, which I think has occurred in even just in the last, several months that we have been under some new direction, not having the same CRA director that we have previously. So I think where I start to look is to say, how do we make that change, keep our projects moving in a forward direction? If we are to select somebody new, there's obviously going to be a learning curve. We have a very big CRA, and I think each one of our candidates indicated that today. I think if we're going to move forward on our process, if we want to narrow it down to 2, are we all just going to name off our 2 candidates that kind of get us to the place where we want to go, or how would we like to proceed forward?
Well, I think I agree with Madam President. I'd love to hear from my fellow board members what some of your thinking is on what you're looking for. Okay. Just as a general conversation. I don't think we've ever had it as a group, and so we have a unique opportunity here, and I'd love to hear what some of your thoughts, or if you have strong thoughts as to what you're looking for. And I know this group always has strong thoughts, so.
That being the case, if I might share a few more
Absolutely.
thoughts. Thank you. I think something that I've heard from our neighbors that's been lacking is someone who is truly listening to the community. I think the feeling has been that we have projects that are delivered to our neighbors for buy-in, and buy-in is different than having input. So I would like to see someone who is going out and actively looking for input at the upfront of conception of any project, big or small, and really having those relationships in the community, going out, and it's more than, I think Commissioner Nearing said, it's more than an 8 to 5 job. It is going out and, having a cup of coffee, maybe going to church, being in the communities that we're serving, as many of us do. It becomes almost a quasi job associated with this. So I think that emphasis on community and being able to realistically execute projects. Mm-hmm. One of the other things I think we've fallen into is that we have so much vision that we can't execute it. So if we can get back to really getting in tune with where the community is ready to go and the resources that we have to get there, making sure we consider those on the upfront rather than putting together a picture that is unachievable and then selling it to the community. So I'd just like to see a little bit more action on the upfront. Thank you.
Mr. Rouse.
I would totally concur with Commissioner Schoaf's idea and position on making sure that the vision is community generated rather than CRA employees generated. I likewise am looking for someone who has the sensibilities of the community, that understands the nuances of the various communities that are at play within the CRA, and likewise understands the dichotomy between the differences between the CRAs, being that of the Downtown Development Association or Downtown, the Greater Northwest, and Northwood Pleasant City. All of them are very separate and unique in and of themselves and require a different eye to get them where they need to be. And so I think that the candidate that we select should understand that, has a proven record in that, and likewise has a proven record of execution.
All right, Madam President.
Thank you. I appreciate specifically hearing from you two, who your districts fall within those CRA districts. I would say there's hundreds of variables that I have been considering throughout this interview process, and what it boils down to for me is, number one, relationships, their ability to connect with the community as well as connect with city staff to make sure that we get things done. And I won't belabor, because I concur with what you both have said about connecting with the community and making sure that they're visible in that community, to hear the will of our residents. I would also say a change in tone, and I think I mentioned that in one of my questions earlier. Agree that buy-in is different from input, and I think that that tone needs to be set from the beginning. I'd also say someone who is trustworthy and transparent. And then finally, I love and I appreciate and I want to see innovative projects in our CRA districts. And I want our CRA to be visionary, but also practical, because I think it's important that we're chasing realistic goals so that we can get more done. Thank you.
Commissioner Peduzzi, yeah.
I don't think I have anything new to add to the general comments. I mean, I think we're all looking for the same, caliber of person. I would be interested. I don't know right now that I'm prepared to say these are my top two. I really would be interested in maybe a discussion about the strengths and weaknesses of each individual candidate, because I see, I see their strengths and weaknesses from every one of them. They all have something different to add. Some of them have more experience in some areas than others. Some have wider breadth of experience. Some may be able to connect with our citizens better. And if we could maybe enter into a discussion there, if I have to start it, I can. But
Let me interject another thought on kind of the global conversation. What I also want to ensure is that we do maintain momentum on our projects, which I think we can do. Certainly having RMA and their capability, their experience, their institutional knowledge, I think we can continue to walk and chew gum at the same time. So while with at least 4 of the 5 candidates, there will be a learning curve in terms of the community, the players, et cetera, and they will be engaged in that process. I just want to make sure that we can maintain the momentum on some key projects that are out there. Yes, Madam President.
To Commissioner Peduzzi's point, I mean, I certainly understand if you're not ready to narrow it down, but I do think I want to be aware of our, of this process, of our time. I mean, I think maybe, would you feel more comfortable if we narrowed it down just to 3 then, instead of discussing all 5? Or I don't know how the rest of you all feel. I thought I saw agreement to discuss the top 2.
It sounded like what Commissioner Peduzzi was asking for, and correct me if I'm wrong, is kind of a discussion of strengths and weaknesses, and you were ready to jump into there?
yeah, I mean, there's certain things, like I can just start off with one that, I was impressed with. I'm sorry.
No, I'm sorry. I don't think that's the will of the rest of the board.
Okay, well, let him at least articulate.
I was just gonna,
That
just as-
doesn't mean we all have to follow that. It just
Just
means
example,
let him
just-
say it.
There may be something that I know that you all don't know. For example, one of the candidates who I actually was fairly impressed with, Giovanni Moss, he showed up 25 minutes late to my first interview. To the very first interview. I gotta weigh that in on, hey, this is a big deal, I would think, for most people, and to show up late. But I don't necessarily think that excludes him in my mind. That's why, I don't know, I'd like to just kind of hear if other people have had, similar experiences or what people's thoughts are on individual candidates, and.
Well, maybe we could weave that into the discussion because it seems like maybe a majority were willing to kind of narrow it down to two. And if you want to, is that a perception? Am I misreading? Two or three? Okay. And then as you were describing whoever your top two or three are, maybe you can address, strengths, weaknesses from your perspective. Does that seem to work? So we could cover both bases. Yes? No?
I'm sorry. Would it make it easier if we were to write down our top three, give them, summarize, and then go through and see if we can have a discussion surrounding that? I don't know if there's some hesitation to, kind of dive into this or be the first one to make that move. For efficiency's sake, I personally do not feel like it's worth a discussion to have strength and weakness conversations on 5 candidates if we are, as a body, moving in a direction that is not in
All
that way.
right, let me make an executive decision, and I think that's a very good point. Why don't we all write down our top 3 candidates? We'll give them to the city administrator, see how that shakes out. And I think it's also advantageous because if we're not, let's make the decision based on what we heard thus far, as opposed to what somebody in front of us just said or we agreed or disagreed with. And then we will see where this shakes out and see where we go from here. And we're doing 3, correct?
Yes.
In no specific order?
No, in specific order.
Okay.
Yes, no?
No.
I would say in specific order.
No,
No, because then you're ranking.
no.
Okay, I'm not ranking. Okay.
I'd
All right, so
rather
no, just your top 3.
Top
In no specific order. Okay.
Put my name on it.
Can't see it? Or-
CN.
Yeah. We're brilliant, that's why.
Get my name on it?
I'm ready if the board is.
Yes.
The top three candidates, Moss, Maury, and Jones.
Read those again, please. Moss,
Moss, Maury, and Jones.
Okay.
Giovanni Moss, Kristen Maury, and Artie Jones.
okay. Okay, now that we've gotten there,
I stand corrected, we have a tie in terms of number of votes. Justice is in there,
so Moss, Maury, Jones, and Justice.
yes.
Okay, so we've eliminated one. It's good progress in 20 minutes. All righty, let's talk about strengths, weaknesses, preferences, et cetera.
Just want to go down the line?
Hmm?
So we just want to go down the line as announced, Moss, Maury, Jones, Justice?
We could just pipe up and discuss it however you want to. Who wants to go first? All right, Commissioner Baduzzi, since you kind of wanted to deal with the strength, weaknesses analysis, then yeah, you go. You talk about.
Okay. Oh, you want me to start?
Sure.
Well, thank you. Obviously, with Giovanni Moss, I think that he could probably connect with our community and fairly well. He seems to be personable, and I'm a little concerned about him being late to my meeting, but not as much so as I am maybe about the lawsuit that's currently pending against his prior employer, which was basically his most significant experience. Kristen Maury, I think she's got good experience, relevant experience in a city maybe a little smaller than us. I'm concerned a little bit maybe about her ability to connect with our residents and our constituents. To me, she seems just, maybe I'm used to people that are a little more animated. She seems a little flat, a little dry. So I wonder whether she has those communication skills to connect with, all of our residents. Allison Justice, I think she obviously is in the best position right now to keep things on track. I think she's well respected. But I guess it's a matter of whether we want to take this in a little bit different direction, but I think she certainly would be well qualified. Artie Jones, the only issue I had was I'm not so sure he was great at answering the questions directly. He seemed to, in a roundabout way, answer the questions, maybe a little too long-winded for me. But those are my thoughts. I mean, I think they're all certainly qualified, and I'm not so sure I have a favorite at this moment.
Okay.
Those
All
are
right.
my thoughts.
Thank you. Anybody else want
I'll go.
to? Okay.
Yeah, I think, and this speaks to your initial question, what are some of the things that we're looking for? What are the tenets? And I think the board did a good job of kind of outlining those, and I agree. The other piece to that I'll say is, I'm hoping that we select someone that in 5 years from now, and again, I know there are obviously no guarantees in hiring, but in 5 years from now, is, integrated, is the face of the CRA, and there are others who maybe on the first day would hold that, but I wonder about the longevity of it. So again, I want to hire someone in the way that I approve projects, that not about how it's going to look the next day, but 5 years from now and then in the future. So that's just an overall general comment. I think Ms. Justice, there is no doubt that she brings a view of what is happening now that's going to be unlike any other candidate. And so in terms of keeping projects moving and what that looks like, there's no doubt in my mind that she, could have those skills. I think there is something to be said about a reset and fresh eyes. And so I would throw that out for consideration as well. Mr. Jones, who I enjoyed meeting with him individually and hearing him this morning. I do wonder if there would be a bandwidth issue, and the reason why I mention that is I too left after hearing him answer some of the questions. It left me wanting more, and I just didn't feel like the questions were getting answered in a detailed way that I would feel comfortable, given how complex our CRA is. And so that's perhaps an issue, but I think in terms of his temperament, in terms of passion, there's no doubt I think he could do it. Ms. Morey, again, I thought did a really, really good job in answering the questions. I think she brings a breadth of experience, or would bring a breadth of experience. I am really concerned about the ability to connect and communicate with the community. Just again, in the times that I've, both today and then yesterday, I came away with the same feeling. Just something was missing in terms of the communication. Again, what on paper and how the questions were answered. And give her a bunch of credit for that. I mean, I thought it was very thorough. But I think this job, communication, is going to be so important, and that just seemed to be missing for me. Mr. Moss, I was impressed with his resume. I was impressed with the way that he answered questions, and I too believe that he, when I think about, again, not tomorrow, but 2 years from now, 3 years from now, 4 years from now, I think he could definitely be a ripe candidate for that. I too, and I'm not quite sure from a human resource perspective, but the only pause that I have regarding Mr. Moss is the litigation that's happening, but that definitely does not exclude him for me. So those are my initial comments.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, great. Overall, I just wanted to make a comment, and I don't know if this is maybe for us for improvement on the future process, but I have to say I was overall a little bit disappointed that the candidates didn't come with more information that they had researched about our CRA and about our community. Now, I did hear a number of them mention that they had short notice, so maybe that's the case, and if that is the case, then maybe in the future we could provide the strategic plan or some things that might not be readily available on the internet, but I felt like there could be some things on them as well to research newspaper articles or our social media pages to learn more about that.
If I could respond, I would just like to
Yes.
share perspective here and ask you all to take that into consideration. There has not, and I've worked for 5 different municipalities, there has not been one job interview that I have gone to where the municipality provides you the information. They expect that if you're interested in a position, that you will take it upon yourself to do that research about that community, about the municipality, and it does not depend on when you actually get called for an interview. When you throw your hat in the ring, that says that you're going to take the initiative to do your homework. So I would ask that you all not include in the process that we provide that information. That is just not a best practice.
Well, thank you, Ms. Johnson. I wholeheartedly agree with you, and I didn't know if that was maybe a suggestion that others might want to support, but I was very disappointed in that, and I asked that question, that they didn't come with knowledge about our community, and even today, the knowledge that they had was based on at least from what I could tell from our answers, was based on the Q&A sessions that they had. Anyways, that's here nor there because I feel like they're all kind of across the board the same on that. I just wanted to make that comment. As for these four, Giovanni Moss was not part of my top three, although, Commissioner Neering, I do agree with what you're saying that, for longevity with an organization, I could see him working with us in some way and maybe with our CRA. I just did not feel like he had the executive level experience yet. I think, what I wrote down was he's fully engaged, great with community events, but just wasn't that executive that I was looking for. So in my top three of them, Ms. Justice, I think one of the questions that I asked her was about how would she bring change. I think that, I think this is probably the concern is that will this be an extension of what we've been having, or will there be a change? And I think that we have all indicated that we would like a change. I think the residents have indicated they would like a change. However, I do just get concerned with making sure that our projects continue moving forward and that we don't have, too large of a learning curve. But obviously if we don't select her, we'll have the same learning curve amongst all of them. Which leaves Kristen Morey and Artie Jones. I agree with Commissioner Peduzzi. I really enjoyed meeting Artie. I thoroughly enjoyed our interview process. I think he's a very likable individual. I think he has a lot of great experience. I think that what I wrote down for him is he has creative solutions and he collaborates with community leaders. But I didn't feel like he was often answering the specific question we were asking today. And so that would just be, my comment about him. Kristen Morey, I agree, Commissioner Neering. In my 30-minute interview yesterday, I would say the first 15 minutes, I wasn't getting that sparkle. I wasn't getting that feel, but I will tell you, I don't know if the way that I changed my questions that I was asking her in the second half, she lit up. And I saw a little bit of that today as well. And I appreciated her giving us the example of her sitting down with the residents. I think that was showing us that she took the extra step to engage residents who maybe weren't, as outgoing and enjoying that situation. I thought that not only did she have succinct answers and she didn't, utilize all her time, but they had great content. I was really impressed with her ability to answer the questions and get to the point rather quickly and to give us solid examples. One thing I wrote down that she said it would be shameful not to form partnerships and that it's a way to make the money last longer. And that was meant a lot to me. And I will say, of all of the feedback that I've received, positive, I would say Kristen was probably the number one that I've received communications on from the residents, as well as I would say maybe a close second or equal to would be Mr. Jones.
All right. Commissioner Rawls?
I would concur with what everyone has said. What I will say, I'm a little surprised that a lawyer would hold it against a candidate for exercising their constitutional right to open courts. That's surprising to me. But at any rate, I felt that Mr. Moss, in terms of being the face of the CRA and understanding the nuances of the various districts, especially the Greater Northwest, from my perspective, is one of the top candidates. I likewise like Ms. Morey and believe that her knowledge of CRA business and construction was superlative. I had the same concerns about Mr. Jones. And, with Ms. Justice, I think that certainly there is no learning curve, but what resonates in my mind is that you can't keep doing things the same way and expect a different result.
Commissioner Shaw.
Thank you. One of the things I was really mindful of when we were looking at candidates was to really give them all the same interview. We kind of have a dichotomy going on where you have a candidate that's been in place, which of course would have the most knowledge and be ready to go day one. But I thought was really important to me was to give everyone that fair shake. I really mean that. The change that needed to be made has been made, and we're going to continue to build upon that change. But I wanted to make sure, I've been in a position before where I've worked under a boss that I didn't really follow the same philosophy. So, I wanted to make sure to give that same fair shake to all of our candidates. And also, not hold it against a candidate that has the experience and not hold it against candidates that don't, because we clearly have a lot of good experience. When it comes to Mr. Moss, I thought he had a really great experience level on the housing and development side, and probably has a good grasp of the capital building and projects aspect of this. Had some community engagement, but I think probably would have a bit of a learning curve there, but could engage with our residents. I do not hold it against him that he has pending litigation with his previous employer. There are all kinds of ways of termination, and I believe holding that against him makes him guilty of something that he is not guilty of. He's pursuing his legal rights, and I think that's fine. Looking at Ms. Maury, I think she and Ms. Justice equally had the most CRA-based experience and had some really great and passionate stories. I likewise found there to be somewhat of a connection missing and engaging in those stories, and I think I saw more today out of that than I did previously, but certainly has the history from a CRA-specific perspective. Looking down the line, one of the things that was important to me too was looking at the numbers. And while I think Mr. Jones has a great working knowledge of projects and how to implement those projects, there was no city by population that compared to the city and the size of the CRA that we have and the size of managing that kind of budget. I found today to not get specific answers to some of our questions, and I think those things were important in the considerations that we have today. Looking at Ms. Justice, I took into a lot of things of consideration here. I think part of what she asked me in the interview, quite frankly, was, is there a larger community call for change? And I was very honest. The community is calling for a larger change, but there is change in CRA director that we've already had, and an opportunity, I think, for her to run things in the way that she wants to run them. Case in point, I think we've seen a lot of changes. I personally have, I'll speak for myself, I personally have seen a lot of changes in the way I am interfaced with in the CRA and the way that is reflected in the community. In lieu of having a CRA advisory board complete weigh-in, I did have the opportunity to speak to the chair, Russell Green, and he speaks for himself solely, not for the board, but did endorse Ms. Justice and the work that she has done as the interim director, and felt like she was a good candidate there too. So I offer that up to the group for consideration as well. I think we should consider as we go along that we do have qualified candidates at the level that they are. We need to determine whether or not they can grow into this larger opportunity, because I do believe that besides Ms. Justice, of course, who was already in the level of financial obligations that we would have as a city, that the other candidates that we have aren't dealing with the types of budgets, and it's a large budget, and it takes a lot to balance that budget, make sure that we are addressing the line items that need to be addressed and really engaging. So I think that's something for consideration for all of us.
Thank you. I will weigh in now, and I think for me it's important to realize and recognize that we still have RMA and under contract. And so to the extent there may be some skill sets that a candidate may not possess or is not strong enough in, I like the fact that we have RMA as a backup to help fill the gaps from a substantive standpoint. So I'm looking more at who do I feel most comfortable having representing the CRA out and out there. I'm going to go in reverse order. I did not have Ms. Justice as my top three. I've had the privilege of working with Allison as the interim for the past few months, and I have not been overwhelmed by what I've seen. I thought this was a great opportunity for her to really step up to the plate and shine, and frankly, I just haven't gotten it from her. There is and I've talked to her about this, a lack of attention to detail, which I find frustrating, and I can't see her in that capacity going forward. There's also the perception, quite frankly, and I think she's sensitive to it, about her connection with RMA. She shouldn't be penalized for it, but on the other hand, we can't ignore it. And so to me, there's not enough of a separation there for me to ignore. Mr. Jones, I think is a very well qualified. I hear what you're saying about kind of his may not answering the questions directly. Another concern I have from a substantive standpoint is kind of familiarity with Florida CRAs. While he's worked with similar organizations in Georgia, there may be some subtleties there that he may not be grasping. So I'd have him in the top three, but I'm not sure he'd make my top two. Ms. Morey, there's no question about the depth and breadth of her experience. I just don't see her, and I think others alluded to it, kind of being the face of making that connection in certain communities that are serviced by our CRA. And then she came alive during my interview, commissioners, and I think has some very good experience, and there is some life there, but it doesn't hit you right away. Mr. Moss, I think really rose to the top in my interviews yesterday, and there was nothing that happened today that that changed that. He said a couple of things today which really resonated with. One was, and I think this goes to the community engagement piece, and it really reflected that little workshop we had, I guess it was on Monday, no, it was last week, about community engagement. And he says it's important to co-opt the community into the process and engage them sooner rather than later. Those are my words, but I think he got, and if you recall that little chart, that little handout that we got, that seemed to be the gist, that if you want to have effective community engagement, you can't go in with a finished product. You need to really hear the community and be open to the opinion of the community sooner rather than later. So that resonated with me, and I thought that he had a pretty good grasp on some of the significant projects and disconnects, if you will, between the CRA and the community, and seemed to be able to address that quite well. So I would have Moss and Morey as my top two, with frankly Moss being number one. So I'll just throw that out there. So now that we've had this conversation, should we attempt to maybe narrow it to two?
Listening to, sorry, Mayor, if I may.
Well, are you going to address the question, or you just, oh, okay, well, fine, go ahead.
Well, listening to everybody, I didn't write down top, but it sounded like we were kind of all over the board there. I'm not sure that we would have consensus on the top two. Might I suggest that we look at eliminating one and start from there? I don't know if...
And going down to three?
I just...
Same process? Write them on a piece of paper? Yes, no?
Yeah.
Commissioner Schoaf?
We can't.
I'm sorry, Commissioner Neering and then Schoaf.
I'm open to it, but we just did that, and I know there was a tie, but I'd much rather proceed with the top two.
There you go.
Yep, my opinion.
I'm with that.
That's
Commissioner Schoaf?
That's fine with me.
So we're going with the top two? Okay. Same process?
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, I thought it was the top two that we turned in?
They weren't
or
ranked.
New again?
We didn't rank them, so
Oh,
just
gotcha.
two. Yeah, no,
Oh,
again.
Was there a clear top two in terms of the numbers?
No.
Without a ranking? Okay, well, let's go with the top two and turn it in.
In no particular order.
No particular order.
Ms. Johnson?
I'm ready if the board is.
Yes.
Your top two candidates are Allison Justice and Giovanni Moss.
Okay.
May I speak, Mayor?
Sure.
Giovanni, again, was not in my top two. And I'll just share, when asked, and maybe there's some other information that in one-on-ones that could be shared with me, but in his answer to question number 3, I think that this one was really telling for me today, was when asked to describe the most impactful redevelopment project, he said infrastructure, housing, projects that last beyond him, the Boys and Girls Club, putting families in home, water, sewer, utilities. While I appreciate all of those projects, those are, I don't know, it didn't have the same depth that some of the other answers that we heard had. I would say that was something that stuck out in my mind.
Okay. Commissioner Schoaf?
A few things to share on that same vein. There were 2 candidates today that one indicated that they never had a project finish late or over budget, and this candidate, Mr. Moss, indicated that he usually always finishes on time. As we've seen the nature of projects and working in construction, as these projects end up being actual construction projects, there are all kinds of things that go wrong. And so I take a little pause with that statement. I'd like to take Mr. Moss at his word, but it seems like that's a pretty big promise in an interview to, you know, finish projects on time, all the time without considering the different elements that go into it. And, you know, to share a nuance, because I think the interview process is part skill level and part a personal feel. And just like Commissioner Peduzzi watches things like time management, during our interview, I appreciate a confident interview. But Mr. Moss said to me, I am the candidate for this job. I am the most qualified. Whether you pick me or not, I don't know. And I can appreciate the confidence behind that, but it really does, there was something a bit off-putting about it for me. It was just, you know, something I put out there to share. Everyone can take it as they do. So that's what I have.
Commissioner Rouse.
There was one answer that Ms. Justice gave today that kind of just took me off my seat. She was asked, other than relying on industry associations, for example, Florida Redevelopment Association or ICSC, how would you stay informed on cutting-edge redevelopment activities? And she said Google. And for a redevelopment professional to say they're going to rely on Google as their primary source for redevelopment, cutting-edge ideas, that in my opinion, was a big no-no. And I'll just say that I haven't seen anything since Mr. Ward left that gave me any confidence that things have changed, that the sunset will be done on budget and on time and in my lifetime, or that the tent site will ever get done. And so reposing confidence in someone who hasn't really done anything extraordinary to change the game, I think is not in keeping with what my charge is for this city, is to see change and to see it as aggressively pursued as possible.
Commissioner?
Thank you, Mayor. First of all, let me just address the statement that I made about Giovanni Moss and my concerns about the lawsuit. I certainly believe strongly and wholeheartedly in open access to the courts. I think what just gives me pause is that, you know, that was his primary experience, and that he, obviously there's a dispute with his employer. He took a year, it looks like, before suit was actually filed in that case against his employer. You know, but I don't know the facts of it, and he absolutely, you know, I guess it could be 50-50 as to who's right or who's wrong or somewhere in between. So certainly I'm not going to hold that against him, that he is in current litigation. I can't help but hold it a little bit against him that he was so late to my first meeting. And unfortunately, I didn't get to talk to him as long. I mean, I got 10 minutes, and I went over into, you know, the break period to try to give him a little extra time to, you know, to talk. But you know, I think he does have the ability to probably connect with our residents, especially in our north, you know, CRA. But I think that either one of these candidates, I'm not so sure that Allison Justice has been given the opportunity really to spread her wings and to show what she can do, you know, apart and separately from the prior executive director. And I certainly think that she seems to be fairly well respected. So those are all the comments I have at this point.
Okay. Commissioner?
Yeah, I'll just add, in terms of the folks that have reached out to me, the majority either had 2 or 3 different names, including Moss, but of the maybe 10 emails that between last night and this morning that I've received, the sentiment seems to be a reset. And so I share that with the board, because it sounds like we've obviously received some different emails, but I share that with you that again, it's 10. We have a city of 115,000, but there are 10 folks who care about the process and took the time to reach out. So in fairness to them, I want to bring that to your attention. Again, I think they were all over the board in terms of who they supported, but they all in the email identified a need for a reset, and some very strongly. So I share that with you.
Mayor.
Sure.
And I will concur that the emails that I have received likewise sought a reset and categorically did not want to see us remain status quo.
Madam President?
So I listed Allison in my top two, but I definitely hear that sentiment and share that sentiment. I would be open to, at least for my top two, removing Miss Justice if we could consider Miss Maury instead. And if I might, actually, while I have the microphone, also to that same question, I agree, Commissioner Riles. I was a little disappointed in Ms. Justice's answer with Google. I understand we all get nervous in interviews sometimes, but I was highly impressed with Ms. Maury's answer on that. And specifically talking about, she knew our difference. She talked about the Greater Fort Lauderdale Association, I believe that, and she compared it to our BDB. She also mentioned monitoring legislative sessions. She mentioned a number of other ways in which she stayed informed. So, for consideration.
So before we address your proffer of a compromise, let me say something, because it appears that we have at least a clear decision. Do we, in effect, stick with the status quo, or do we opt for change? If it were me, I would opt. I am adamant about opting for change. With respect to Mr. Moss's litigation, I can't speak to his time management. I don't know what meetings he had before. He may have been meeting with me. I don't know what time you were on the schedule. I don't think we went over. Maybe we did. In any event, with respect to his litigation, he was the plaintiff, and some say, well, that was his only job of significance. Well, that probably confirms the fact why he sued, because if he had been with a company for an extensive period of time and felt that he was wronged, he was going to take, he felt that he probably should pursue some legal action to address that. I was, impressed that he even brought it up, although it probably would have come up in the background search anyway. I just think as we evolve as a CRA, I would feel very confident with him being the face of this organization going forward. I think he has certainly the intellectual, experiential wherewithal, and I think he gets it when it comes to community engagement and what it takes to effectively communicate with the residents of the community. I think that I'd be very disappointed if so that, I think someone alluded to it earlier, it's the definition of insanity when you do the same thing over and over again, expect a different result. If we are looking for something different out of our CRA, I don't think Allison Justice is the person that gets us there. And I'll just be very candid about that. So I think what we are looking at now is we're at a fork in the road. Do we want to kind of stay on the same path and be satisfied, or do we want to make what I think would be a bold decision for change? And I think it would be change that would be welcomed and that would be effective. Commissioner Shove.
A question, probably more a human resources question. As we're looking at someone who has had, employment litigation, and we're looking at how we're proceeding forward, what is our probationary period?
90 days.
Just address for a moment, in the hiring decision, you should not take into account whether or not this individual did or didn't have litigation. So if that is still in your mind in any way, please remove it and consider him based on his qualifications and answers to the interviewed questions. Thank you.
Probationary period?
You still had a question, Commissioner, on, Mr. Mayor?
Excuse me?
It's probation
She
period.
wanted to know the probationary.
Period. All city employees, which this would be, have a 6-month probationary period. But again, this is a at-will department director, so it's really at any point for any reason for that the board determines they can, always hire and fire a department director.
So as we're considering, I've heard some of the same calls for change through our neighbors. The tough decision that I struggle with, again, is that same decision is, has Allison Justice been given the bandwidth to really operate independently? That being said, I think there's an opportunity for us to have a change, to look to see what could be explored with Mr. Moss as well, because I think the community wants to see something different. So, I think we have two really qualified candidates here, and I'm not sure where Commissioner Lambert's proposition sits, but as it sits right now, we have a 1 and a 2 candidate somewhere in these 2 candidates as per the charge of this meeting. So, I don't think that we go wrong either way. I would support having change. I support allowing change within our organization. So, at the will of this board.
Well, I would entertain a motion for Moss being number 1, and we'll have to discuss number 2.
I would move to identify Giovanni Moss as our number 1 candidate. Then,
Is there a second?
I think
that's it.
I thought you moved it, Mayor.
I said I would entertain a motion.
I'll second.
Okay, been moved and seconded. Further discussion?
I would like discussion, Mayor.
Sure.
So if you all were to entertain my suggestion of replacing Kristen Morey with Allison Justice as the second, what I was going to offer is, a comparison of the two. And, while Mr. Moss has extensive experience, and like I said, I think he would make a great addition to our team in some role, I just didn't see the executive level experience, but I did see his ability to connect, his ability to be out in the community. And so I don't say whether that's, better or not than one. I do think that they're very different, because in Kristen Morey, I just saw very specific answers, very detailed experience, decades of experience in CRAs, and just at her fingertips answers and details about her experience and budgets and how she would handle each situation. Talking in detail about Sullivan Park and the community partnerships that she created. So just for consideration. I mean, like I said, I like Mr. Moss. I'm hopeful if this is the will of the board, then that he'll do a good job. I just wanted us to have some discussion maybe about those two. If we are in fact saying, hey, we want to go with change, then I don't know that it's really fair that we had picked Allison Justice as the second, and I'd like to have
No, we're not at a second yet. No, this is only number 1.
Right, but I would presume by picking a number 1, then that's, so we made a motion to pick number 1?
Just number 1. We haven't picked a second yet. I don't think the motion covered a second.
I didn't cover a second.
No, but I'm not even, I understand that, but we're talking about number 1, that's who we'd offer the job to, and then if it didn't work out, I'm not comfortable with that motion yet, because I still feel like I would have liked to
We'll vote against it.
I will, but I'd like to express my comments if I could.
Okay, no, that's fine.
Thank you. So what I was saying is, I'm not ready yet to vote on number 1. I'd love to have some more discussion about 1 and a possible 2, if now we're saying, that we all want change and
But
that.
why are we
Allison's-
talking about a 2 when the motion is a number 1? I don't understand.
I
how we
mean,
got to
I
a 2.
don't mean number one, as in the one we're going to offer the job to, and number two would be take it if, I just mean, can we have 2 candidates that we discuss openly before we select a number 1?
Well, I mean, okay, I hear you, and so Commissioner Neering.
Thank you. And so we're in discussion, right? We have a.
Yeah, discussion on the
All
motion. It's a motion on the
So
floor.
here, my concern specifically to Miss Maury is we have RMA, and we've talked about the technical support that they can offer. I absolutely worry about the level of connection and communication with Ms. Maury. I think on paper, and I think in terms of the interview, the answers to the interview were thorough. There is no doubt. And I've said that. She was in my top 3. She was in my top 3 when we did that exercise. Because of that, because of her impressive resume and the way that she answered the questions, I struggle, with the way that I sense her communication, both in the individual. I didn't have that peak of the way that you described it. I didn't have that. And today I didn't see it. I saw someone who thoroughly answered the questions, but I'm trying to picture her in a room or a cafeteria, and commanding the room, articulating a point on behalf of the CRA, and that's where I struggle specifically with Ms. Maury, and the ancillary support that we have, meaning RMA, technical support, not there necessarily to coach around communication, and not that they couldn't, of course, but I'm missing that with her. That's my thoughts.
Commissioner Peduzzi and Commissioner Shove.
Thank you, Mayor. While I can appreciate the desire for change, I also personally find some comfort in that which I already know, especially considering the process that this has gone through. I mean, we just met these people yesterday, the other ones, and it's been kind of a whirlwind. You meet them yesterday and boom, we have a couple opportunities to talk to them and hear about them. And so I just find myself with, I think maybe it's because I know Ms. Justice, better, and I've seen what she's capable of. Maybe there's a higher comfort level there at the moment that may not be there in 2 or 3 days, once I get to know the other candidate or multiple candidates better. But that's just my thought. It was kind of a whirlwind, and I kind of, when I'm not sure about something because I feel like I haven't gotten the full grasp of the person, I'm going to fall back and rely upon that which I feel the most comfortable with and know. So that's what I'm thinking at the moment.
Commissioner Shove.
Thank you. And I just want to address this from a process standpoint because we've gotten to this place where we've narrowed it down to 2. And while I appreciate Commissioner Lambert wanting to, resubmit for Ms. Maury, I think that would be at the determination of whether it fell into the top 2. As we proceed, we have a motion and we have a second. I think we will proceed to go to our candidates, and if we vote against, we vote against, and it comes back to discussion. But I think opening things back up to bring in another candidate, we could bring back any of these candidates for discussion, but we've kind of narrowed down to this place. I still think that there is the opportunity to have change and consistency and continue down a path that leads us to more direct results. I'll just leave it at that.
All right, well, hold on, let me talk to.
I just was raising my
Okay.
hand.
I think that I would be very comfortable with Mr. Moss as the new executive director of the CRA. The combination of him, his experience, combined with the RMA team, I think it would be could represent, if he's approved, an exciting new direction for the organization as we move forward. I am not one to and I don't know how the process could have been different where we could have gotten more time to spend with the candidates. It was pretty straightforward. Yes, there was a lot of activity in a very short period of time, but we have people who are traveling from outside the state, outside the city, and again, I'm not sure what other time you could have spent with him. In any event, I'm comfortable with the process as it's played out to give us the information I think, that certainly that I need to making a decision, and I'm willing to do that. As to the number two, to me, that's a separate question. We got a motion on the floor for number one, and let's consider it at some point. You still want to address the number one? I do have a question. Okay. Okay.
Well, I have a comment first, is that while I appreciate wanting to follow that we all said, hey, we'll take and narrow it down to 2, that was not a process that we all deliberated on, and I mean, it was just a quick decision. So, I would hope that in these kinds of circumstances, we might, consider other options, but I am understanding that that's not the will right now, and so I'm good with moving forward with this motion. But I have a question, because it has been mentioned a couple of times that, we feel that some of you feel comfortable with Mr. Moss knowing that we'll have RMA as a backup. Can someone elaborate on that for me? Because I would just so that I can feel more comfortable that there is that backup.
RMA is still under contract, correct?
Yes, we still have a contract with RMA. They provide a number of functions, one being the deputy position, some other specialty areas, a real estate person, management person. The 2 lead people, Mr. Brown and Ms. Briesmeister, still are also part of the team who manage the city's contract. I think that's what was being referred to. They have obligations under the contract to continue to provide that support as needed, and if we find ourselves in a position that we think that we need to give the new person, if it's a new and different person, additional backup, we have an opportunity when we amend the contract to provide them with the additional support that they need while they get comfortable here in the city.
Thank you. That was very helpful. I appreciate that. Was there additional? Commissioners, did you have anything else that you wanted to add to that?
Any other questions, comments on the motion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, like sign.
Nay.
Motion carries 4-2, if my math is correct. Okay, so that's the number one candidate. Now our task is to identify the number 2. Now, I don't think we're wedded to the names that have been presented, because it's never been proffered that this is the person that will be the number 2 candidate. We simply selected. So I'm open to however we want to get to the number 2. I would suggest that we simply do the same thing with this. We put in now a name for number 2 and look at it and see where we are, or we can discuss it, see what we have.
How about entertaining a
Make a
motion?
I'll make a motion that Allison Justice is selected as our number 2.
All right, it's been moved. And is there a second?
Second.
Been moved and seconded. Discussion. The only thing I would say, which I don't want to beat a dead horse, is that I would not be comfortable with, I personally would not want to see Allison continue as our permanent executive director if something happens to Mr. Moss. So I would be voting against that motion. Any other discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
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 All those opposed, like sign.
Nay.
Nay. Now, I lost track.
It's a tie.
It's a tie.
It's a tie. So that means the motion does not carry. Do we have the
Correct.
names? Do you need the names of who voted against it and who voted for it, or you have it already? Okay, cool. All right, so that motion doesn't carry. So we still need to designate a number 2.
Mayor, I'd like to make a motion that Kristen Maury be listed as number 2.
Second.
Second.
Been moved and seconded. Discussion. Hearing none. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed say like sign.
Nay.
All right, there's one nay. So that motion does carry. All right, so we have a number 1 and a number 2. Okay, anything else?
Salary range.
Sorry?
Salary range.
Oh, yes, salary range. Thank you, sir. We do have a number here. So for clarification, Ms. Johnson, you're saying that the current salary range is between 121,330 and 181,995?
That is correct.
That's okay. So the question, commissioners or board members, is whether we're comfortable with that salary range, whether we want to narrow it, adjust it. What are your druthers? Commissioner Shove.
I've looked at the salary range as it compares to, other cities. I think the range looks good to me. I would feel comfortable moving forward with that. Obviously, assuming, and we've discussed this, that the exact negotiated salary would come back to us before approval. So if we're looking at the range and authorizing staff to negotiate within that range, something I'm comfortable with.
I would agree with that.
All right, now, there was does the exact salary come, because it's not a contract position, it's at will, so you're saying you need to see the specific salary, or you're comfortable with staff negotiating something within the range?
My initial understanding was that staff would come back to us with the negotiated salary for approval, and that is what I would request.
And I think that they were coming back thinking that they were entering into some separate contract, but this position is a city position. There's not going to be a separate contract. What they would do is, if they come to an agreement as to an amount of money that that employee would accept to work for in this position as a CRA Executive Director, normally what happens is an offer letter for that amount goes out. It's not a contract that comes back and gets approved. I do know that you all sat and approved the F resolution that provided the funding for the position already. So if you come, together and say, well, we recognize that the range is X dollar to X dollar, but we're only willing to fund the salary at some smaller range, I think that would be appropriate. I don't know that the board needs to approve so long as there's a budgeted amount.
Were you looking for us to approve the specific salary, Commissioner Shove?
I think
Just knowledge of it.
I understand today we would approve the range. My understanding as per today is that we approved the range, but before an offer was given, we were notified and would approve what the actual range was. And I say that because we're looking at quite a spread in the range. And what I don't want to happen is that we are negotiating at the top of this range and then coming back very soon to increase this range.
Well, that's why I said if you want to tweak the range, or if you want to narrow the negotiating flexibility, then we should have that conversation now. But I don't think, if they give him a number within the range, he accepts it. What is it that we would do as a board? You're saying that we would have a second bite of the apple? That wouldn't be fair to the candidate.
My understanding as it was presented to us today is that we would approve a range, and that when staff negotiated something back, an offer to a candidate, maybe a counteroffer that the candidate had, that we would have basically a last right of refusal before that. If that is inaccurate, that is fine, but then I will make my comments appropriately.
All right, so what is, I don't think we get a second bite of the apple, do we, as a board?
If I could try to clarify.
Sure.
The agenda item that came to the board sitting as the city commission, you all have approved the range that is before you. I think what we were looking for is that if there is a range within here, let's say if the board's comfort level is that we negotiate, let's say anywhere between 130 and 150, that kind of direction, under no circumstances would we negotiate above this maximum range, because you all have already established what the top end of the range would be.
Okay,
I have a
Commissioner?
question of clarification, if I could.
Okay, but did you have a follow-up to that?
Yes, my question was, we had talked about other staff positions. Does this staff position fall under the regulation that it could be negotiated no more than a certain percentage above the base salary, as we have some salary ranges that we have throughout the city where an entry-level position, I can't speak out of school on the percentage range, but you can only offer initially a certain percentage above the bottom of the range.
Typically, how it is done, and I'll let Jose, I don't know if this is cast in stone, the department directors have discretion to go, I think, 5% above the starting range. If it's anything beyond that, then it comes to me as the city administrator, and I take a look at whether or not that is going to cause compression within the salary structure, look at their background and experience, and then based on that analysis, we'll either approve that 10% above the starting range or deny it.
Jose Luis Rodriguez, Chief Human Resources Officer. And for further clarification, department directors are not classified as union employees. They're senior managers. So as senior managers, that wouldn't apply in this situation because you can start anywhere in the range and offer a position that is anywhere in the range. And another clarification for you is that this range is not in a vacuum. Because you created this and approved this position at the commission meeting as a department director equivalent level position, it fits in the same range as any other department director. So it's not a special range that would typically come back for changes because all department directors are considered GM 17 with a specific range. So chief of police, for example, is in the same, is in the similar, it has their own range, but as a department director. Well, that's a bad example because chief of police has their own range, but for non-public safety.
And we don't typically approve a department director's salary, correct?
No, as long as you budget it within the range.
As long as it's within range.
Yeah, you approve the budget and you approve the range, and we
All right.
stay within that.
Madam President.
Thank you. Who does approve the department director's salary? Is it just negotiate, it's just as long as it's negotiated within the range to the HR and the applicant then negotiate that, or does someone approve that final offer?
Administration.
In municipalities, department directors' salaries are typically negotiated between the city administrator or city manager and that department director. In this case, given that we have a strong mayor, the mayor would certainly have the discretion to weigh in on a salary offer to a department director.
Right, so because this role is reporting to the CRA board, that was my understanding why we would just see the final number, was just that we are the supervisor of this position. So that's all, it's just trying to keep in consistency with the process that we follow for other positions of this same level.
And again, I will take direction from the board, which is why I clarified if there is a comfort level within this range that the board, indicates you're comfortable with the negotiating with a range between 125 and 140, or whatever the case may be. And if it is the pleasure of the board, once we reach an agreement on a salary within that range, if the board's pleasure is for me to then come back and inform you all of what that salary is, that can be done. I think what we're trying to maybe clarify is whether or not that specific agreed upon salary will come to the board for a vote. And I think that's what your attorney is telling you, that is not part of the process. But again, I will take direction from the board.
And I guess, if someone is uncomfortable with a number above which they don't want to see this particular position receive, we should know that now.
Yes.
Right now, the range is 121,330 to 181,995. Keeping in mind that over the course of years, there will be increases in pay. I think it's 3% we've been historically been given. So anyway, Commissioner Rouse.
Mayor, we've established a range. I don't see why we would go back and try to second guess the city administrator. She understands that she's not, that this board first of all, she can't go above the range.
Right.
And if she's going to engage in negotiations, we need to give her the latitude to do that. And it wouldn't make much sense to put him at the top of the range now, because then he would be hamstrung until we change the range at some future date.
And believe me, knowing this city administrator, she is not going to let that happen. She's a much shrewder negotiator than that. Yes, Commissioner Shove.
We've looked at this range several times. I am not comfortable negotiating at the top of this range, which is what brings me pause today, that we have previously set a precedent that we've negotiated at the top of a range. That being said, I have full faith in the city administrator and her negotiation skills. This is what we've published, and I will leave that in her very capable hands.
Any other comment?
So you need a motion?
Do we need a, yeah, well, the range has already been approved.
Right.
All I would ask, Ms. Johnson, is if you would meet with the commissioners, the board members individually, let them know what the decision is, if they have any questions about the negotiation process, just keep them as informed as possible after a decision is made, as promptly as possible. Let them know what that number is.
Absolutely.
Please.
If-
I don't think we need a formal meeting because it's not a formal vote, but if you could just let them know in meetings.
Absolutely, but if I could, and I certainly will do
Sure.
that without question. But I would like to just share with the board what you look at when you're negotiating a salary.
Sure.
You certainly look at their background and experience. You look at other similar situated, in this case, CRAs. You look at the size, you see what is the tenure of that current CRA director, where their salary is. So you look at a number of things that you take into consideration what you're going to offer that candidate, and they would have to make a convincing argument, if they feel that they deserve something much higher. So that's pretty much how that would proceed. Never negotiate a salary starting at the top end.
Okay. I don't think there are any other items on the agenda. Any comments for the good of the body? If not, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you all very much for your.
Thank you, board.